So, in lieu of not having made a whole bunch for a very short amount of time, that seems a lot longer when you have to coexist in the zeitgeist of other people's attention spans. I am going to read another chapter that I really, really like from one of my absolute favorite books, I Should Have Kissed Her More by Alexander King. It's chapter 6. A little while ago, my wife said to me, "Last night I read most of what you've written so far, and I'm surprised you overlooked two people who are quite devoted to you, Amadio Peperdi and Mr. Killian." She is quite right. Peter Killian walked into my life some 23 years ago when I was living out in the country and trying to write a play. 6 plays, in fact. At any rate, I was living in an enormous mansion that a friend of mine had loaned me while he had to go abroad on some urgent business of his own. One afternoon there was a knock on the door, and when I stepped out in the wind-blown porch of this fraudulently lush edifice, I was confronted by a little grey-haired character who seemed to have come straight out of a novel by Charles Dickens. "Mr. King live here?" he asked. You must remember that for quite a few years before this weather-beaten gnome had landed on my doorstep, I had been dodging squads of sheriffs, miscellaneous process servers, and assorted bill collectors with an agility which the hunted wildlife of the world tried vainly to emulate. So naturally, although my visitor looked harmless enough, I had no intention of offering up my true identity without further painstaking investigation. "Which king do you want?" I asked. "I'm looking for Alexander King," he said. "I'd like just a word with him, if you don't mind." For one unguarded moment, a cunning look came into his moist blue eyes, and for just the shadow of a second, a certain ominous twitching in his shaggy brows gave potent warning to my ever-alert, precautionary antenna. "Well," I said, "my name is Gabriel King, and you're looking for my cousin Alexander, who isn't around just now." "Ah," he said, "that's too bad, because I've really taken quite a bit of trouble to find this place. It isn't listed anywhere, and I had a heck of a time locating it." I can't tell you why, but I had suddenly developed a kind of liking for the old goat, and although it would certainly have been to my advantage to get rid of him, I simply couldn't get myself to turn him cold-bloodedly away. You know how it is with people. There are occasionally incalculable bonds of sympathy that spring up between them, mysterious radiations that encompass two human hearts, so that from the first moment they meet they cannot ever again feel indifferent to one another. "Come in," I said, "and I'll wrestle you up a cup of coffee." "Thank you," he said. "I take that very kindly of you. It's a pretty raw day, and I could stand a cup of something hot." He proceeded to wipe his clean shoes very elaborately on our phony seafaring doormat, and followed me into the house. He was wearing a sort of oversized Scotch plaid mackinaw that had at least a dozen pockets on it, and when he removed his poison-green cap with thick ear flaps that could be tied under the chin, his bristly grey hair stood out wildly in all directions. He looked like an elderly schnauzer that had died on me some years before, and it may very well be that this resemblance was really the secret keynote to the harmonious rapprochement between us. "Perhaps something a little stronger than coffee would be more to your taste," I said. "It might at that," he concluded. I've been out since 6:30 this morning because I wanted to catch the 7 o'clock ferry at Nyack." I took him into my workroom, which he instantly called a study, and proceeded to pour him a shot of scotch. He held the glass up to the light and said, "You're a most generous man, Mr. King. May you never lack the wherewithal to serve it, nor a grateful friend to appreciate it." Then he poured it down in one eye-watering swoosh. "Want a chaser?" I asked. "Nah," he said. "There's nothing like natural saliva." "Sit down," I said. "I will, for a moment, if you don't mind," he said. He took out a dark, measly little pipe and proceeded to stuff it, getting crumbs of tobacco all over his coat. With methodical care, he slowly collected all this debris, and when he finally lighted up, he filled the room with acrid clouds of what subsequently turned out to be some of his own home-raised weed. "Grow everything I can myself. he said, smiling comfortably. Be sufficient unto yourself is my motto. Tell you the truth, this man Alexander King, this cousin of yours, would be a lot better off if he had that as his slogan. Is that so? I said. What do you know about him, anyway? I know that he owes the telephone company $2,300. And I came around today especially to talk to him about it. Oh, yeah, I said. I've heard about that phone bill of his, and I must say he isn't altogether to blame. Ah? He had a crazy house guest up at his place in the country 2 summers ago, and this cookie was in love with a geisha girl in Kobe, Japan, and I think he called her up to her native tea house a couple of dozen times between Friday and Monday. That's certainly unfortunate, Killian admitted, but it is the iron-bound duty of a responsible householder to look after his property and the welfare of his chattels. That's the code of Abraham. So you're a bill collector for the phone company, I said. I would never have guessed it. No, you wouldn't, he said. There's lots and lots who wouldn't. That's why I get the worst accounts. I get the terminal cases, after everyone else has given up. And if I do say so myself, I've had some remarkable results. I bet you have. Are many phone bills as high as all that? How come they let them run so long? Unusual circumstances often prevail, as in your cousin's case, for instance. Now then, just a week ago yesterday, something happened that pleased me mightily. Yes, sir, it was a real pleasure for me to see happen what happened on that day. Care to tell about it? I said. He took out an enormous old railroad engineer's watch that had a tick in it you could hear plainly all over the room, looked at it with knotted brows for a moment and said, I've got 37 minutes to get back to the station and catch my train, so I'll have to make it brief. You see, Mr. King, some collection cases are so difficult that after a while you can't help forgetting all about the money that's involved, and you just sort of get interested in the chase itself. It brings out the Nimrod in you. The primitive hunting instinct, I said. Exactly. Well then, I'd had this case that I'd been tracing for almost 3 years, and a couple of times it had come so close to solution that I finally decided to forget all about it. It was too heartbreaking to be right on top of a payoff when suddenly the subject took your wind and was lost in the underbrush without leaving a spoor behind him. This party's name, by the way, was Millard Tompkins. Ever hear of him? No, I said. Can't say that I have. This guy Tompkins was very discouraging, was he? The worst, he said. And it was in this spirit that I was going home late one Friday afternoon, and, as I may have mentioned before, I generally take the ferry up at Nyack. There's where I make my home. I've been a widower for 20 years, and I'm very punctual in my habits, so I generally catch the same ferry each evening. Now then, I don't know if you're familiar with this ferry, Mr. King. If you aren't, you ought to take a look at her sometime, for she's a real beauty. She's an old Mississippi side-wheeler, trim and lacy white like a bride, and if you stand on deck and look alongside this little beauty, you've got a feeling that people who travel in airplanes have already missed most of the fun in life at the very start. At any rate, I'd always had a nodding acquaintance with the captain of this vessel, and when I went up on deck from where I could see him, he smiled to me and suddenly gave a loud blast on the horn. I couldn't have been more surprised. It was a most unorthodox procedure, and before I could recover from the shock of it, he blew another blast even louder and longer than before. And then he opened the door to his little glass-enclosed cabin and waved to me to come closer. He's drunk for sure, I thought to myself, and I just hope we make it to the other side all in one piece. Come on up here, he shouted to me. Come up and take the wheel if you like. So I climbed up the iron stairs, and when I came abreast of him, I could plainly smell that my suspicions about him were only too just. You're feeling very gay for a weekday, I said. What's the cause of all the joy, anyway? It's my last ride on this ferry, he said. I'm retiring from active service tomorrow. Go ahead and take yourself a shot. It's on the house. I stepped up and poured myself a little one. You don't look old enough to retire, I said, by way of truth rather than flattery. I ain't, he said. I ain't supposed to quit for another 5 years, but I've had some good luck, some mighty good luck lately, and there's no use carrying my rheumatism up and down this river if I don't really have to, is there? There is not, I said, and it is permitted to ask what the nature of this luck of yours happens to be, so we might keep an eye out for it ourselves in case it ever passes in our direction. You may ask indeed, he said, and I'll tell you what it is. You see, some 8 years ago, that daughter of mine married a no-good Hollywood character who, for the next 6 years, wasn't able to earn a penny for himself, much less for her. Then 2 years ago, he suddenly got a job to go off to Africa and make some kind of a film with natives and wild animals and everything. And, now listen carefully, this film is making such a mint of money that my daughter and my son-in-law insist that I give up the river and come and live with them in California. Now I'm asking you, is there a Santa Claus? He turned away from me and gave another fierce toot on the horn, and then he slapped me on the back and said, You'll come up to the house with me the minute we land, and I'll introduce you to the lot of them. Besides, you'll get to meet my son-in-law, who's a real celebrity now, and you'll have a chance to boast that you know him personally. You may have heard of him already. His name is Millard Tompkins. I have heard of him, I said, and you tell me he's rich now. He's rolling in the stuff, said the captain, and not a bit proud either. You'll have a treat shaking hands with him. Finish your drink. We're ready to land. It was this guy you'd been looking for 3 years, I said. How did he take it? Like Trader Horn, philosophically. Later, after Killian had gone, and only the smell of his homegrown shag still permeated the premises, I wondered whether he knew that he'd been talking to Alexander King that afternoon. I really couldn't make up my mind. He was such a cozy old codger. But when, during my first television program 2 years ago, I happened to look casually out over the audience, I noticed him sitting on the aisle down in the very first row. He waved to me reassuringly, like an old friend, and after the show he came back to my dressing room and said, You served me the best whiskey I'd drunk in maybe 10 years, and real hospitality is an institution so rare and so sacred that I wouldn't have profaned it for the world. After all, there's more to life than just money, isn't there? Although I'm mighty glad you're finally making lots of it. By the way, I think there's a little account of yours that is still outstanding, isn't there? And some accounts, as you perfectly well know, are never outdated, are they, Mr. King? They are never outdated, even if they happened 25 years ago, because, as you and I know, they are inscribed indelibly on the heart. The second male stowaway in a book ostensibly devoted to women is Amadio Piperdi, a peculiar hoodlum, whom I originally met when I was living down in Mineta Alley. This was also quite a long time ago. Amadio owned a pool room right near me on 6th Avenue. It had only one table, which nobody ever played on, because the whole grimy one-room emporium was just a blind for all sorts of bootlegging operations. All this took place during those trying years when I used to wear pink ties exclusively. And so you can imagine the whistling and caterwauling that used to take place every time I had occasion to pass that disgusting pool room. All the young understudy gangsters, such as would nowadays be called juvenile delinquents, started to scream and yodel themselves into apoplexy every time they got a gander at my tie. They weren't juvenile delinquents, because there was nothing juvenile about them. Most of them looked prematurely aged and wizened, and the clothes they wore were sharp and slick in the most depressing sense of those two deadly words. There wasn't a leather jacket among them, and nobody displayed any effeminately luxuriant locks. Snap-brim hats were de rigueur, and if any one of them had played any musical instrument, like a guitar for instance, they would automatically have disqualified themselves from the fellowship of truly tough men. And they were plenty tough. You had to be in the booze racket, because you weren't only up against the city cops and the federal men, you were also constantly at war with other gangsters who were just as ruthlessly brutal as you and your friends. Amadio, who was the leader of this outfit around the corner from me, was a sort of Napoleonic type of leader. That is to say, he couldn't have been more than 5 feet 2 inches tall. He was also handsome in a strange, carved-up kind of way. Dark-haired, dark-skinned, with a rather disarmingly sweet smile. He had beautifully kept teeth, and could have been cast without difficulty in some movie epic about Sicilian bandits. I found out that he had a smile a lot later, because for quite a while there, whenever I saw him and gave him a friendly nod, he merely stared at me out of those cold, obsidian slits of his and offered me a mask of complete deadpan non-recognition. Me and my kind just didn't exist for him. And that's how it went on for the better part of 2 years. And then, one afternoon, just before dark, he was standing in front of his dump all by himself, and when I passed and offered him my usual abortive little smile, he suddenly showed his teeth and said, "Come on over here." I nearly fell over, of course, but I at once approached him, sideways, like a schooner that has suddenly changed its track. "You an artist, ain't you?" he said. "Yes," I admitted. "Want to see something real beautiful?" "Sure," I said, "any time." Without another word, he turned around and stepped into his mildewed pool room with me practically stepping right on his 2-inch rubber heels. I'd never been inside this cavern before, and I certainly hadn't missed anything. The table was so huge, it hardly left any room for players. The cloth was in terrible shape, and about half the cue sticks had been sawed off for purposes only too easy to be imagined. From the wire racks on top, where you were supposed to keep score, there dangled 2 pairs of shorts and a sweatshirt. They had been recently washed and still dripped water down onto the pool table. At the back of this room there stood an enormous old-fashioned steel safe on which an American eagle had been stenciled between the words Goldberg and Kaminsky. I couldn't for the life of me imagine what the sinister nut was planning to show me. He manipulated the lock on the safe, and after opening the ponderous doors, he took a key out of his waistcoat pocket and opened a smaller compartment that was now exposed, way in the rear of this treasure trap. While he was judiciously sifting among some of his papers, I noticed that a ring of perspiration had started to form inside his shirt collar. Finally, he pulled an ordinary penny envelope out of the safe, turned around, and gave me a long and ominous stare. It was clearly a stare of last-minute appraisal, and I had a strong feeling that I had better not do any smiling just then. So I stared non-committally back at him. And that's how we stood for a goodish spell, like a couple of strange buffaloes who have suddenly come face to face on a prairie somewhere. "You like pigeons?" he asked me. Luckily, I had known for some time that most of the Italian gangsters in my neighborhood were great pigeon fanciers. In fact, I'd often watched as some of these strange monsters aired their flocks just before sundown up on the roofs of the corrupt buildings they infested. This airing was done by swinging enormously long bamboo poles around the various dove cots and nesting places of the birds, whereupon these mystically agitated creatures strangely affected by such maneuvers would swoop and swirl by the hundreds over all those tenement dwellings. It was also by means of such stratagems, that the various pigeon aficionados would attract stray birds from other flocks, and I'd been told by some of my better-informed neighbors that after some of these successful abductions, it frequently happened that bloody gun battles ensued among our local caravan leaders. So, when Amadio asked me whether I liked pigeons, this awareness of the prevailing conditions around me stood me in very good service. I was nearly on the verge of saying, "What do you mean? Do I like pigeons? I was raised among pigeons. I'm a pigeon myself. When I was a kid, I used to raise some, out in the country," I said. "Country pigeons," he said contemptuously. "They're mean and they're full of lies. There ain't a better pigeon alive than the pigeons below 14th Street. I seen 'em all and they all stink except the pigeons round here." He slowly opened the envelope and took out a pale gray feather with tiny white bubble markings near the tip. "Look at this," he said, and I noticed that his voice was all choked up with surprising feeling. Oops. I took the feather from his hand and placed it in my palm for a moment. "That's a real beauty," I said. "I never saw a prettier feather in my life." "You can say that again," he said. "That's Rover's right side tail splash. There never was no better looking bird than Rover. Never." I realized that he was terribly drunk, and that I had very good reason to be scared. After all, this prehistoric man was baring his innermost heart to me, while he was plastered. But what would be his attitude after he sobered up? The possibilities for mischief seemed so unlimited that the little feather in my hand suddenly started to tremble. "Rover was the best in the goddamned neighborhood," he said. "And everybody knew it, too. That's why they knocked him off. The sons of bitches knocked him off while me back was turned. Well, I got even with him. I fixed Whitey Harris for that. Whitey didn't live out the winter. Fell off the roof. Well, it didn't bring Rover back, that's for sure." He took the feather out of my hand and unashamedly wiped his eyes on his coat sleeve. "You're an artist," he said. "You can appreciate them colors. That's why I showed 'em to you." He turned from me and put the envelope back into the safe. After he'd locked the door, he said, "You want a beer or something?" "I got ulcers," I said. "I can't drink nothing, not even Cokes." "This beer'll never hoit you," he said. "They give it to kids." "No thanks," I said. "I'd better be running along now." And I beat it. I was in a jam, that's for sure, and I just wondered whether it might be a good idea to move away from that neighborhood altogether. I thought about it for a few days, but you know how it is. After each eruption of Vesuvius, the surviving peasants move right back into the shadow of imminent disaster and start replanting their vines. I settled for avoiding the pool room as much as possible and pretending that perhaps he'd just forgotten the whole thing. But about 10 days later, I absent-mindedly found myself in front of Amadio's door, and before I realized it, I was right on top of about half a dozen young punks who generally hung out there. And then a strange thing happened. As I landed plop among them, they made way for me almost deferentially. And although I was wearing a pink tie, nobody squealed or whistled at me or after me when I had passed them. I couldn't believe my senses. Pure magic. From that day on, nobody ever bothered me again. I passed Amadio's fearlessly at least a couple of times a day, and I never heard a peep out of anybody. I had come through. The following year, I moved uptown and forgot all about the pigeon lovers. It must have been nearly 7 years later that they suddenly came to my attention again. I was working on a newspaper and had just come home from a miserable day in the swamps of New Jersey and was running myself a hot bath while looking through my mail, when there was an unexpected knock on my door. I opened up, and two very unpleasant characters were standing out in my hallway. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see that one of them, who looked like a cockroach, instantly placed his size 13 shoe over my doorsill. "What is it?" I asked. "The boss wants to see you." I thought to myself, I've certainly fallen asleep somewhere in a Jersey trolley car, and I'm dreaming a piece out of a bum old movie. That's what it is. The only thing wrong with that consoling thought was the smell that emanated from these two creatures. They had obviously doused themselves in some kind of horrible male toilet water that was advertised all over the place. The kind that is strictly masculine. That is to say, it was distilled out of dog sweat and pheasant feathers. At any rate, before I could get any further information out of them, they had stepped into my living room and had left me standing out on my doormat. So I joined them. "You guys are making a mistake," I said. "Whoever the boss is, he certainly don't want to see me. I'm a newspaper man, and I keep my nose clean." "Give him the letter," said the shorter and more frightening one, the one who looked like a dung beetle. The cockroach took a piece of paper out of his pocket and handed it to me. It was a note from a priest whom I knew, Father James, his name was, and he officiated in one of the most relentlessly bitter slum sections in all of New York. He had done me some small kindnesses throughout the years, but I had never been really very close to him. By kindnesses, I mean he'd saved me lots of trouble and fruitless running around when I was trying to check on a story by tipping me off if I was chasing down the wrong alley. He knew the city's darkest side as no cop or postman could ever have known it, and it was certainly very useful for me to have such a thoroughly informed man amiably disposed toward me. His note said, "I thought about this for quite a while, and I have decided you might be of some help in a matter which concerns someone we both know. I hope you will feel like doing something about it. My best wishes to you." "Okay," I said. "I'll have to get dressed. Who are we going to see? Father James says I know him." "It's Amadio," said the dung beetle. "Oh, him!" I said. "I ain't laid eyes on him in 7 years. How's he doing?" "You'll see." They had a car downstairs, and we rode through the wet, sleeting night in absolute silence. When we passed the neighborhood where Amadio's pool room had once operated, I noticed they showed no signs of slowing down, but were actually steering further east toward the Bowery. "Where's he hang out now?" I asked. "In Brooklyn, right on the other side of the bridge. 10 minutes, that's all." Silence again. When we hit the other side of the bridge, they had me completely at their mercy, since I've never in my life been able to figure Brooklyn. At last, we finally landed at a warehouse of some sort, and we had been expected too, because the minute we pulled up, a huge double door opened automatically and we drove right in. I found Amadio lying on a bed in a frantically overheated room, deeply preoccupied with cleaning his nails. As I told you in the beginning, like a bum movie. After we were alone, we shook hands, and it was clear to me at once that he was drunk again. Well, I hadn't done so badly the last time I'd seen him plastered, so I took heart and sat down opposite him. "The boys say anything?" he asked. "No, they showed me a note from Father James, that's all." "Yeah, he told me where you lived. How you been?" "Working hard, but not too bad." "I ain't been feeling right," he said. "I ain't been feeling right for nigh on 2 years. He sat up on the bed. "It all started with Carola. You remember Carola. Oh, I guess she was just a small kid when you was around last. Anyway, she's Nick Loreda's sister. You remember Nick?" "Yes," I said. "He once helped me to build some bookcases. Pretty cockeyed bookcases, too, but I remember him." "That's the one," he said. "Well, his sister Carola twined out a very beautiful goyle. I went out with her a couple of times, a couple of years ago, Coney Island and stuff, and I guess I was starting to get stuck on her pretty bad. I didn't know what to do. She was just a kid, a decent kid, and I was 44, so I just didn't know what to do. But then, suddenly, everything got suddenly out of hand." Amadio reached for the bottle and took a great swig. "We got caught in a bad pour, out near Jericho Turnpike one Saturday, a cloudburst or something, and we stopped off at this tavern a friend of mine runs. What a sky! Give us a room to dry off in, and before you know it, we was in bed together. And then a funny thing happened, and to me, it never happened to me in all my life. I went like crazy. I just couldn't stop kissing her. I kissed her all over, every place, all over, like I was drunk or something. But I wasn't drunk. I never drunk nothing when I used to take her out. I kept on kissing her. I just couldn't stop myself." He reached forward and put an iron grip around my wrist. If I had inadvertently smiled at that moment, then surely that moment would have been the end of my biography. Luckily, I was in no mood for smiling. I was deeply moved. I was moved because before me there sat an unregenerate Stone Age man who was completely shattered by something he couldn't understand. He had fallen in love. Love, in his circles, was for softies and sissies, but real men like himself never admitted that they needed anybody. Of course, they slept with dames from time to time and spent money on them, but the feeling which had suddenly overwhelmed him while he was lying beside this lovely young trusting creature was something so altogether out of relevance to the rest of his existence that it just threw him for a loop. I put my hand on top of his and said, "It can happen to anybody, Amadio." He released his hold on my wrist. "Yeah, that's what the priest said. He said what husbands and wives do between themselves ain't nobody's business. You see, I married Carola. I had to. I couldn't let a dame walk around with other guys that had something like that on me, could I? I made her do the same thing to me, right away, and she seemed glad to do it, too, but I figured a priest just butter everybody up. That's his business, ain't it? He don't want nobody to feel they's too far out of line. But it kept bugging me. Anytime I heard anybody say anything that sounded like a doity crack, that sounded like he meant me, I'd knock 'em cold on the spot. Couple of times I nearly killed a couple of guys. Some guys would say maybe, "Go on, you doity muff diver." Not saying it to me, you understand, just saying it. I'd be right on top of him, and maybe put a knife between his ribs. It happened again yesterday, right in Father James' parish. Then he told me to talk to you. He said you were an educated man, a guy that had been around, and that you would know about it. He looked at me like a dog that is waiting to be beaten but is hoping for an unexpected reprieve. My poor, tough friend was utterly baffled and cowed by love. "I got a book at home," I said, "and this book was given to me by a doctor friend. It is called The Moods of Love, and it was written by a man called Harold Carter, a doctor too. In this book, this guy Carter writes a few pages about lovemaking between married couples, and he describes in detail just what you've gotten through telling me. He's all for it. He's all for everything that makes people show that they care for each other or whatever makes them happy. You've been telling me an old story, Amadio, and I hardly know anybody who would have been surprised to hear it." He jumped up, put 2 fingers in his mouth, and gave an ear-piercing whistle. The cockroach and the dung beetle were instantly in evidence. "This guy's got a book in his house I want you to get right away," said Amadio. He turned toward me. "Give them the keys to your place and tell them where they can find it." Fortunately, I knew. "It's the first book, on the left side, on the 3rd shelf, from the bottom," I said. "It's got a dark red binding and gold lettering. It's called The Moods of Love by Dr. Harold Carter." "Write it all down for them," said Amadio. "And now make it snappy, boys. Get uptown and get back fast. I got a lot on my mind, so scoot." After the beetle and the cockroach had left us, he lay down on the bed again, and in a few moments he was asleep. I looked at him, stretched out quietly, and wondered for the 10,000th time about the great mystery of the human heart. This slum child had probably never seen unashamed love or unself-conscious affection between men and women. He was a man as some fierce creature in a jungle is a man. And never throughout the years had he ever doubted the well-prescribed route of his own willful virility. He knew, of course, that there were other weaker men who allowed themselves to be carried away by their feelings for some women, men who made foolish sacrifices for their bedmates and who, in extreme cases, even permitted this affection to color every aspect of their lives. He and his fellows had nothing but contempt for such weakness. He also knew that there were some decadent side pockets in sexual behavior, and, by his standards, people who were trapped in such deviations were actually beneath all contempt. And this had been his code until that soul-shattering night when the naked body of the beautiful girl beside him had torn him out of the clutches of a lifelong sexual cliché, and had suddenly turned him into a lover. It was too much for his poor stultified imagination, so much too much that he was compelled to seek some sort of answer to his shameful problem from the priest. And when that answer had proven too glib or too facilely consoling, he had finally brought his deeply troubled heart to a total stranger, to me. I don't know how long I speculated about all these matters in that revolting, overheated room, but at last I could hear the returning emissaries stumbling up the stairs again. They had the book. After we were alone, Amadio said, "Sit down next to me on the bed and read it to me. Read it real slow." I found the place quickly enough, and I read to him the case history of the woman who had come to the author because she was troubled by profound misgivings about her connubial life. She and her husband were in the habit of abandoning themselves pretty freely during their sexual involvements, and since they were highly respected members of their community, her husband was even a deacon of the local church. She was deeply disturbed in her conscience about what seemed to her their excessive nocturnal indulgences. The doctor instantly put all her fears to rest and assured her that she had no cause whatever for any uneasiness, that their sexual behavior was perfectly natural and normal and was only the inevitable outcome of their passionate affection for each other, and so on. Amadio took the book out of my hand and slowly repeated what I had just read to him, and then he gave a laugh, such a laugh as had probably not issued from his mouth since he had been a small child. He laughed 3 times like that. Then he tore the page out of the book, and after folding the paper very carefully, put it into his inside coat pocket. I thought to myself, that page will land right alongside that old pigeon feather that he showed me 7 years ago. It will be another one of the few symbolic artifacts of his desperately troubled life. "You done me a great favor," he said, taking my hand. "You done yourself a favor, too, 'cause I ain't never gonna forget what you done for me. If you need anything, ever, just let me know. Another thing." He pulled a $50 bill out of his pocket. "Here, go buy yourself another book." "No," I said. "I've read it all, a long time ago, and I ain't ever gonna read it again anyway." "He might someday need another copy, for another emergency, like tonight. Here, take it. It's damn cheap at the price." "All right," I said. "I'm glad I was able to be of use." "You sure was. Imagine this guy, a deacon, in a church. A deacon. Can you beat it? Man, you sure don't know what people do when the window shades is down, do you?" "No," I said. "You most certainly don't." I thought it ended a different way. I think it might have ended in another chapter elsewhere. So maybe I'll read that in the future. Or you could go find yourself a copy of I Should Have Kissed Her More by Alexander King and read the whole book because it's really worth your time. Bye bye.